Hello and welcome to the Point Forward podcast, Milwaukee Bucks chatter from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It has been a slow start to the free agency period. We thought it might be, and it absolutely is. They got a couple teenagers that are new to the Milwaukee Bucks after the 2024 NBA draft that is now in the rearview mirror, and we will see if there are still moves to be had. They did get Malik Beasley, around a few days after the free agency period kicked off, June 30th last year. So, maybe there's still a move in the offing. We will see. My name is JR Radcliffe, and I am joined by my colleague, Jim Owczarski. He is the Bucks reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. We're going to talk about free agency, what's left, what they could still potentially accomplish here with the players that are still on the board, when a trade might come into play, if a trade comes into play. We'll start briefly with the draft, though, Jim. We'll go in some chronological order. I think I went into the draft despite, loving the mock drafts and whatnot, really believing that those picks were more assets than they were players, that they were picks that were going to get shipped off elsewhere in an attempt to bolster the 2024-25 Bucks roster. That's not what's happening. They drafted AJ Johnson, who was playing in Australia and scoring 2.4 points per game, as everyone pointed out on social media. Tyler Smith, a G League guy who actually had been connected to the Bucks in a few mock drafts, promising young guy. Again, 19 years old. These guys are not going to be ready next year, and presumably not even maybe the year after that. So those are two long-term plays, but those guys were in Milwaukee on Tuesday meeting the media. Like the Bucks have said multiple times, they intend to sign, they intend to roster these players. So even though they might be projects, they're going to be part of the Bucks in 2024-25. That surprises me. That is contrary to how John Horst has typically drafted. Give me your top of mind thoughts to them sort of trying to make this future movement. Is that a necessary move because they just simply can't add those, it's still only about the core pieces and that they might as well just play for the future? Like how do you interpret what they did on draft night and the next draft night? Because there were two nights this year.
Yeah. I mean, credit to John Horst for being a little transparent and sort of admitting like, hey, the picks were on the table to be traded. He had said everything. Now that's not a big surprise. I think when there are no names, associated to these things, that's what it is. And that's probably when draft picks are at their most valuable, right, JR? Mm-hmm. When a limitless possibility. But you don't just trade picks for nothing. That probably meant they would have had to have been attached to a veteran of some kind. So the Bucks, I can see JR, like every path they could have chosen, including this one, made sense in some fashion. And so let's pick the one that they chose, which is to draft two 19-year-olds. And with the intention multiple times on the record, they have said of signing them and rostering them. The Bucks do not own a first-round pick or a second-round pick next year. So as we record this, they don't have a draft class of 2025.
Right.
So, okay, how are you going to add young talent next year? In 2026, they are swapping with the Pelicans again and do not own a second-round pick. So if the thought is we're going to run it back with the six-man championship core plus AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr., Marjon Beauchamp, well, there's 9, plus whatever free agents they sign. Now we're up to 12 players who will play in some way. Well, now you've got a back end of the roster in Chris Livingston and now these two picks, JR, that are exciting, have a lot of potential. Maybe they can get some run in certain situations, but they're 19 or 20 years old. They are the Bucks of 3 years from now when maybe everyone else is gone. And so the hope is the Bucks and these players can sort of defeat the odds of draft position and the math and history that shows that these guys, maybe at best are rotation players. So that makes sense. Like you add that all up, it makes sense that you would go really young. If the idea is, well, if we drafted a 20-something, ready to play rookie, well, that rookie might have only gotten 8 minutes a game anyway. So why not go with maybe the highest upsides available? So on paper, and even conceptually, JR, like that makes sense. Like this decision tracks and makes sense in terms of the long-term play for the Bucks, especially given the fact that they are win now and have salary restrictions and roster building restrictions, both because of their payroll and because of trades for Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard. So like, I could have understood anything, just as I understand this and maybe why they're taking such a flyer on these two players.
This is a little bit of a sidebar. Do you think John Horst is going to stay? I mean, all next year at this point, I would think so. But like beyond that, like how, because the general manager that makes those moves is somebody who I would imagine expects to reap the benefits of those moves. But there were whispers that John Horst might be looking elsewhere. How do you see his situation at this moment? Yeah,
it's a good question. Unfortunately, the nature of his availabilities at this point haven't really allowed us to get into that with him. But what was sort of widely reported, that the Pistons would have been interested in speaking to him for a VP of basketball job, and the Bucks ownership and or Peter Fagan are like, nah, he's under contract. He's good here. We'll see. His contract is coming up. He's not a lame duck GM, but he's got a couple years left, and that's, enough to make executives or coaches feel a little itchy, I'm sure. We'll see. I think JR, if they get to a finals and win a title, I think we're seeing John Horst gets an extension, breaking some point later in that, the evening the next day or afternoon the next day. So, I think that's the job of every general manager, JR, is to balance the now. And that's what this free agency period is the now of this year versus, well, I kind of traded all the assets that we have. So here's maybe my one shot at a swing for maybe a year, 2 years. I might as well take this now also. We tried to explain how limited the Bucks were, try to even throw around scenarios that would suit them, that would be likely. And it isn't even about just the Bucks being over the second apron. It's other teams that are also facing financial penalties if they try to make moves. It really restricts movement in terms of who can sign which players, what trades can be made, that sort of thing. With all that in mind, the Bucks have done very, very little to move the needle since the free agency period opened, which again is something you probably would have expected. They weren't going to sign Klay Thompson and make that work. Those things weren't going to be on the table for them. They do bring in Delon Wright, who is I would say a journeyman to some degree, and he's a guy who's he's not going to score much. I think he's got a career average. I think it's 5 points per game, roughly 4.6 or something like that, or maybe that was just last year. I'm getting my numbers mixed up, but. He's somebody new. They also bring in Stanley Umude. At least that was reported that he would be on a two-way contract, which I do think is kind of interesting because it's a sort of a higher profile two-way contract than I guess what maybe might be used to as people who follow the Bucks. But I mean, we'll talk about Delon Wright because he's the best of what's around in terms of high-profile signings. Where do you think he contributes to the Milwaukee Bucks going forward? Yeah, and real quick to just sort of button up how your lead into that, JR. They can only sign veteran minimums. And I know people seem to freak out because the initial reporting had his salary slightly wrong. Yeah. He is only getting minimum. What's going on with Woj? The Bucks can only sign minimums. Now, the way minimums work are the longer you're in the league, the higher your minimum. A second-year guy cannot make as much as, say, Jay Crowder or Delon Wright. The difference is the NBA and the PA very smartly to protect their veterans and to not have teams just only sign 3-year guys. The league reimburses teams for the difference. So Delon Wright is going to make a shade over $3 million, like 3.03 or something like that. The minimum is like 2.7. Like the league is going to pay the other $500K or whatever that is. It doesn't matter. Like even if they brought Wesley Matthews back, Wes is going to make 3.3. That's like the most. But the Bucks are only actually paying 2.7, whatever. Yes. So right. They can only sign veterans. They don't have to offload any money to sign veterans. That like, yes, the second apron is restrictive, but the NBA is like, well, you still have to field a team, and that's a minimum of 14 guys. So there has to be a function for that. This is the function. Okay. Now back to Delon Wright. Yeah. Journeyman. I mean, the Bucks are going to be his 9th team, I believe, since coming in 2015-16. couple times in his career, in some of his like half seasons with teams, he's averaged in double figures, you know, when he's gotten almost 30 points a game and maybe started more often. But for the most part, he's come off the bench, JR. I mean, 85 starts in 500 games. Again, that's not to say he is not maybe in competition for a starting two guard alongside Damian Lillard. It would make sense. He's also like a combo guard, though. He can play point. So if he's right now the backup point, that would also make sense. But he is more well known for being a very versatile defender, you know, 6'5", 185-pound, stronger guy, athletic, as you know, John Horst and Doc Rivers have said to me on several occasions this summer. I'm like, hey, what about all these 35, 36-year-olds that you've been signing and it hasn't really worked? And they're like, well, it's not so much age, it's about the spring and the bounce. Delon Wright just turned 32. Clearly they feel, you know, he still has a lot left in the tank in that way, JR. Good fit. You know, last year acquired Damian Lillard right before camp, signed campaign media day or just before media day.
Yeah, he was here on media day.
Those were their point guards. So, you know, the fact they're kind of getting this done a little earlier is helpful. I do think they could probably use another, you know, if not traditional point guard, or at least another backcourt player. But, you know, we don't know their plans for Andre Jackson Jr., excuse me. The AJJ of the different AJs on the team. So, you know, if Andre is somehow fitting into this, I think the rest of free agency will show us, I think, JR, where they feel Marjan is, you know, as a small forward type player, and where they think Andre Jackson Jr. is in terms of, you know, how many minutes he might play. I think AJ Green is always going to be in that sort of shooter role, right? Instant offense, kind of come in and do some of that stuff. I think we'll see, you know, if they add another forward or another wing, bigger wing, clearly that would add some defense. But yeah, Delon Wright, I think, is a guy I know Bucks fans have been sort of pining after for several years, and you know, now he's appears headed to the Bucks.
Yeah. AJ Green's going to be really important this year. I mean, everybody who's left is going to be really important this year, but it is criminal that we have an AJ Johnson, an AJ Green, and an Andre Jackson, who's referred to as AJ Jackson sometimes. So that's too many common last names with AJs. That we're not going to be able to handle this, Jim. I'm already freaking out. You're only going to have one active per game. That's going to be my rule, to make things much easier. What is left on the table for them that they can realistically accomplish? I mean, I'm thinking about trades here. You know, there were still rumblings that maybe Brook Lopez would be on the block. Bobby Portis is a guy that you could conceivably see moved. Again, though, that comes, we you know, the caveat exists all the time. Their teams can only do so much with the way the restrictions are, Bucks obviously included. So, you know, you can't aggregate salaries, for example. So it's not going to be, as we've said before, Brook Lopez plus something to get a younger, you know, spicier player. It's just not going to work that way. It's got to be 1-for-1 for the most part, you know, unless you trade these draft picks before you sign them. But clearly they don't expect to do that. What is on the table that you think is realistic, if anything, to really bolster this team? Not just bring in another veteran minimum, you know, a veteran on a minimum contract, but to really bolster the team.
You know, it's a great question. I don't see that.
Right. I don't
like
either.
It's look, if they were gonna make a Lillard type or Holiday type move, which is what I'm guessing you're asking.
Well, those are the top end, you know. I'm even thinking Joe Ingles, you know, like he was signed, so it's not the same thing, but I don't know anybody like that.
I think look, Bobby Portis makes $12 million a year. I would argue he's outperformed that contract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't know if swapping him for another $12 million player is going to get you the same value.
Yeah.
Even if we were to pretend that player is also a backup for Giannis. Right. And so like Pat Connaughton is a $9 million player, you know, thereabouts. Pat is like the 154th highest paid player in the league as of like before free agency. And yeah, I know someone would say, hey, there's 450 players, but the only players making what Pat makes are like rookies and like rookie level deal. Like Pat's $9 million seems like a lot, but it's not really a lot. And so, yeah, like maybe the Bucks would say, sure, we think we could get more athletic or maybe a little younger, or maybe we would like a different skill set than what PC offers. But, you know, okay, he only makes 9. So if you're desiring that, you're not really trading Pat Connaughton to like San Antonio. Like they're not ready for a guy like him. And like,
right.
You know, so it's, you know, Brooke and Chris were really the 2 big guys. But again, if you want Brooke and Chris, you're conceivably a contender. And also you're having $23 to $31 million players who, if they're younger or better or more, like, then why are you getting rid of it? So look, John Horst traded for Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard. So I will always give him that credit and that sort of like, hey, we gotta, until they open up camp, you know, because I don't think they would make a move in camp at this point. I think last year they realized that was kind of a disaster.
Exactly. Yeah.
But until they open up camp, I think you always got to give John Horst that. But I think it's just right now, JR, as we record this, it sounds like they're ready to move ahead with this team and the other 2 guys maybe they acquired free agency. I just don't think that bigger deal was out there because it's not just the Bucks issues, as you alluded to. Los Angeles Clippers let Paul George walk for nothing because they didn't want to get to the second apron. Now that's the second apron. There are plenty of teams who want no business with the first apron. There are other teams like Dallas that purposely hard cap themselves at the first apron with this sign and trade with Golden State, which means they cannot go over the first apron, which means they're pretty much done, right? So like it's not just a Bucks thing, it's the league itself, JR, of these teams really not wanting to venture into the waters that the Bucks are clearly swimming in.
With all that in mind, that this is probably the extent of the I don't know, big moves that they can make. Do you still feel where you were a while ago, where you still feel like the Bucks can contend for a time? Because now Paul George plays for the 76ers. The 76ers are a whole lot better than they were a couple weeks ago. Obviously, a lot of pieces have moved around. Boston re-upped, you know, Tatum and Derek White. They're going to, you know, their window will close at some point, but it ain't going to close next year. Do you still feel like the Bucks are positioned to do this? Especially, I mean, because obviously if they're healthy, I think the answer is yes, but I just don't foresee a world where these same 5 dudes that they've been relying on can stay healthy for the, you know, forget the regular season, even for the playoffs. We have not seen that in the playoffs since they won the championship in 2021. So it just feels like there's no way for, and we've said this a million times, but just feels like there's no path forward for them. It's either like hope it works out, that everybody stays healthy, or bust. I don't know.
I mean, championship or bust, right, JR?
Yeah.
I mean, that is what it is. And look, when they made the Lillard deal, it was clearly win now, win in 2 years. You know, Brooke, he's a free agent after this year. Chris has an option after this year. Don't pick up those options. You know, if they have a healthy season and perform well. So yeah, like, and I know Bucks fans are tired of that, like if healthy, but it's I think when you're a team, you have because you sort of know that there's going to be bumps and bruises, but you don't ever expect guys to miss all seasons or full playoff runs. Like that's like no team can really weather that. And we saw that. There's a reason the Indiana Pacers were in the Eastern Conference Finals. No disrespect, although that might come as disrespect.
It's disrespect. That's fine. They got James Wiseman now.
Well, they were good enough, right? And look, Boston withstood the loss of KCP, excuse me. Kristaps Porzingis. Sorry, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on my brain.
There are so many abbreviations, Jim. There's AJJs and RJLs and QBTs. I can't take it.
I guess, JR, I challenge you. What's the path forward? Like right now, the path forward is to win an NBA title this year. And then if you're into next year and you're that curious, well, Dame and Giannis are still under contract. Chris is an option that if you look at his history, odds are
he'll be gone.
Especially if they win, he'll either pick up the option and extend, or he'll decline the option and re-sign. So then you still got the big three with these younger guys moving. So is the path forward 5 years from now that you're wondering about?
No, I'm legitimately talking about this season.
Yeah,
I don't think there's life for this team after this season. There is, because those big three could still be here. Yes.
Yeah.
They're gonna be old.
Look, I know it's frustrating because the Bucks have been frustrated. Specifically, Giannis Antetokounmpo has been hurt in every playoff since the bubble, other than the Celtics playoff. And we all saw that he turned in arguably the greatest 7-game series an individual has ever had that no one will ever remember.
Yeah.
He dominated Boston. I mean, the stats are insane. JR, I mean, it's just, it is forgettable because they lost, right? But he's been hurt since 2019 in every playoff. Obviously, he came back to play in the finals, and we know what happened. But in all the other ones, they got eliminated when he was hurt. And I don't know, and the Bucks have tried their best to buttress that, specifically Dame, right? And I think if Dame doesn't get hurt against the Pacers, who knows what we're talking about. But that's what happened. And that's, I think, any team. You mentioned Paul George. I mean, Paul George played a bunch of minutes last year. Good for him. Joel Embiid was not healthy again in the playoffs. Will Paul George be healthy? I don't know. If he's not, guess what? They're not winning either. No. The Knicks are a better team with Mikal Bridges, without a doubt. They are younger, more athletic. They're switchable. They're all these 6'8" guys. But again, if they are now into their 90th games played at 44 minutes under Tom Thibodeau, and they're not healthy, right? So I know it sucks to keep saying if healthy, but you have to assume it if you're the Bucks. And if that's the case, yeah, look, man, none of these teams have had to deal with Giannis for 2 years in these playoffs. And credit to Boston for doing what they did 3 years ago. But Giannis is still the best player in the East, JR. And if not, the best player in the world, we'll give Joker his due. He hasn't been available. And so I think if you're the Bucks, you have to be all right, if our guy's available, we have as good a chance as anyone to win a championship in this coming season.
Yeah, it's not like the NFL or Major League Baseball where depth is king. You assume there are going to be guys that you lose, and then your job is to make sure the third string guy is ready to contribute in a meaningful way. In the NBA, you got 14 roster spots, 15 roster spots. Yeah. If it's not your best guys, there's no one else.
Yeah. And John Horst literally said it today at the introduction of the 2 draft picks. He's like, well, if you think about a playoff rotation that starts at 9 or 10 and then gets shorter, if you're rocking with 8 dudes and 3 of them get hurt and they're your best 3 players in instance of the Bucks this year, you're really in a bad way. That's just not, you're right, JR. It's not the all the success stories we've seen of the third string running back or the 4th tight end or the what. It's just it's built different. It is different. And if you're a Bucks fan, you just gotta kind of hope that whatever couple free agents are next for them are hits. You referenced Beasley. I think that was a hit. And I think Delon Wright, we'll see, but they need another 1 or 2 guys there that can be meaningful contributors in a playoff rotation.
Right, and we're running out of you got to wait a little bit to see if anybody's going to give them more than the veteran minimum before they get to the Bucks, right?
Right,
A little bit of plinko where they're just kind of waiting, biding their time.
Oh my God, free agent Plinko. Oh my God, it's like little names that like Shake Milton's going over here. And,
yeah, I love that.
Josh Okogie's going over here, and Daniel Tice is coming over here.
And there are some names out there, like they could get a big, but it's gonna be Daniel Tice, like I don't know, or someone on that equivalent. Are there any names that really jump out at you as guys who might be intriguing on a veteran minimum?
And that's the thing. This is what I'm curious about, JR, is like what if it's not a name, but like someone who can be helpful, right? Like, and I think maybe that's what John Horst is trying to sift through. Like, okay, who has a skill set that in this sort of package or this combination of players or this game scenario can be helpful. Like Delon Wright to me is like a 20-minute a game backup, right? Backup guard.
For sure.
Like I think he can fit all that stuff. Now a name, I mean, like do the Bucks and like what is their appetite for potential? Like, well, Sadiq Bey has got a torn ACL. He's not going to play for us a la Joe Ingles for a while. But now we'll have his bird rights. He's 25. We think that athleticism, that if they assume he's back and all that stuff, like, is he a guy that is, can fit this in a certain matchup? Like, he's not a great 3-point shooter, but, or he wasn't last year, I should say. Like Atlanta's that year was kind of bad for him, but in the past, he's made threes. You come to Milwaukee, 3-point shooters make more threes because they're more open. Like, do they is that a name? I think because he was an all-rookie guy. He was a former first-round pick. He played for Detroit. People kind of know him. That's what I'm kind of curious about. Like knowing that they don't have a pick, they don't have a ton of guys under contract. Like, is Bey a guy that you just sign him, you hope it works, and then you have a chance to give him a raise? I know like the Athletic, as we record this year, I mentioned Daniel Tice. Apparently, like there might be some interest there. Who knows? 6'8", kind of backup big. Is he a huge, defensive player? I don't know. The names are, what are they looking for? Like Chetty Osman's coming out of San Antonio, 29 years old, again, has shown flashes of being a high-level 3-point shooter, 38% 1 year in Cleveland, 38% last year in San Antonio off the bench. I mean, what are you looking for? Do you feel you need more shooting? Or because of Dame, it's like because he adds that to your team, do you feel like, well, let's work in some different, dunker, athletic type guys, rim runners? So I don't know. It's tough, JR, because I think Doc's a different kind of coach than we're used to, and we're not used to him. He hasn't built a roster here, and so I think John Horst is even trying to figure that out as well. Yeah,
Tice could shoot a little bit, maybe. I mean, I could be talked into it.
He's bigger though. Like he's just a bigger body.
Yeah.
Like
I think they really need a ball handler. I mean, honestly, when
I think another
was available with that 33rd pick, it's like, oh, this is the one. Like this is gonna work. And then they passed him up, and he was taking one pick later. But
and I think that's where Wright. Like I'm not surprised that Wright was maybe one of their first, or the reportedly first. Because there aren't a ton of like point guards. Everyone needs those. And then look, guess who's available? JR, Pat Bev, Cameron Payne. He
got into some trouble. I'm not sure Campaign is as available as he was last year.
Right. You remember Jeff Doughton? He played for the Bucks for a cup of coffee in a COVID year.
Yeah.
Hey, Ty Washington was the guy they had on a 2-way. He's free agent again. Like there's not a ton of those guys. Maybe Bucks fans are shouting Dennis Smith Jr., but like again, okay. At some point though, you have to remember Giannis handles the ball and Chris handles the ball. So how many ball handlers like do you really need? So it's kind of interesting to see how targeted they're going to be here. Tyler Smith might spend more time in the G League, JR. But right now, he's their fourth big.
Mm.
Since I've been on the beat, I mean, there was a time the Bucks didn't want four bigs. The fourth big is Serge Ibaka and Robin Lopez and Myers Leonard and guys who don't play. So you're going to add a fifth big? To me, that would mean if you're signing him as a free agent, that means Tyler Smith is playing like every game in the G League.
Yeah.
We're never seeing that dude. So, which is maybe what they decide. I don't know. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting, dance, I guess, they have to play with just 2 roster spots as of now.
He is Jim Owczarski, Bucks beat reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Anything we're missing, Jim? Anything else that we need to know here as we head into the latter half of the free agency period?
Just Doc Rivers finalized his coaching staff. So as you read at jslline.com, Darvin Ham is returning.
Did we talk about Darvin Ham returning? No,
we have not talked about that. I think that was after the fact. Oh no, maybe we touched on it a little bit.
I think we did.
But Darvin's back. Doc also added Greg Buckner, who was JB Bickerstaff's associate head coach in Cleveland. Jason Love, who was with Doc in Philly, player development coach. He's going to be working with Giannis, Brooke, Bobby, and the bigs, or is anticipated to. And then Doc Rivers said they were able to hire one of his sons, Spencer Rivers, who was an assistant under Monty Williams in Detroit. Worked with Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, Cade Cunningham last year in sort of a player development role. So he's on the team. Joe Prunty is back.
Our guy.
He is staying on the staff. So is Vin Baker. And so since we last recorded, that means Patrick Mutombo and Trevor Gleason, who were kind of some of the holdovers on from Agent Griffin's staff, they have been dismissed. So
and Josh Oppenheimer, what's up with him?
Yeah, he had been let go earlier in the offseason, along with Sidney Dobner and DJ Baker.
Is that a red flag for you at all to not have Josh Oppenheimer around? We're getting into the weeds a little bit, but long history with Giannis, the shot doctor, so to speak, that has been kind of in Giannis's corner.
No, there's no alarm bells. I think it probably raised an eyebrow or two initially around the league, but the facts are, Josh was fired once, dismissed once with the Bucks years ago, and Mike Budenholzer brought him back. So, that has happened since Giannis has been in Milwaukee. So no, I don't think. I think this was, a matter of just Doc is rounding out his staff, and then if you're looking for holdovers whom Giannis has a good relationship with, Vin Baker clearly checks that box, and so does Darvin.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. All right, Jim, thank you for chatting. We will of course be in touch again as news breaks. If news breaks, could be even later this week.
Yeah,
when they trade Giannis and
right. Yeah, as I go through that whole 6-minute speech on trading Chris or Brooke, but again, you always got to give John Horst that little window, and
who knows? Damian Lillard is suddenly the centerpiece of the Milwaukee Bucks, and AJ Johnson's getting really big minutes off the bench.
You just had people drive off the road.
All right, Jim. Thank you for checking in here on this edition of the Point Forward podcast. We will talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.